Morning, I'm Rory and welcome back to Sawyer Academy. In this video, we're going to be covering basic log scaling. And why I'm going to call it basic log scaling is that there is an entire course dedicated to training people on how to scale logs. You go to school, you take a course, you get to recertify every few years. It's an entire profession on its own that has nothing to do with sawing. So I don't want to undermine what they do by trying to teach something that I don't fully understand. I'm going to be teaching basic log scaling as it applies to us sawyers. So just a quick disclaimer, we're not going to be covering everything that has to do with log scaling, just how it applies to us. And then from that, we're going to take what we learned in the last video on FBM, this video on log scaling, and in the next video, we're going to be doing probably one of the most important videos of how all that comes together for us as sawyers. With log scaling, there's going to be different scales that you can use. In your area, wherever you're located, you're only ever going to use one scale. Here in Ontario, we use the Ontario log rule. So everything I'm talking about today has to do with that Ontario log rule. Wherever you are, you're going to have to look up what log scale is generally used so that as you're talking with people, you're both kind of on the same page as far as volumes and things like that. Now, how to physically scale logs. Scaling logs has nothing to do with the weight of the logs. Logs get loaded on the trucks and the trucks go over scales, but has nothing to do with the weight of the log. It's totally just taking a very good educated guess on the total number or the total volume of lumber that exists within a log before it's sawn. And how we do that is generally, I like to use tape measures. There's also dedicated scaling sticks. You can get a scaling stick in the scale that you would use in your area. And the scaling stick just kind of makes it quicker. You can also make your own scaling stick if you want, a lot cheaper. But for general use, all you need is a tape measure and a scale, a table, if you will. So I'm going to throw up on the screen right now the Ontario log ruling scale, or the table that I'm going to be drawing numbers from. This is a number that's available, or a table that's available online. And again, you'll have to look up what your scaling table would be. So don't use this table if you don't live in Ontario and use the Ontario log rule. If you're in the States or you use a different scale, you're gonna have to look up your own table to draw the numbers that we're gonna talk about today. They're derived the same way, just the numbers will be different because these tables are based on a more complicated equation and then summarized in the table. I'm not going to get into the equation because it's just going to make things way more complicated than they need to be. Just know that the numbers in those tables are derived a certain way using that equation. If you notice in the table, we're only going to be concerned with logs of even length. So 8, 10, 12, 14, and 16. We're not looking at 7-foot logs. We're not looking at 15-foot logs. And we're not looking at anything longer than 16 feet. In my area, that's the only acceptable log lengths are 8 to 16 even feet. So 15-foot logs would count as 14-foot, 13-foot logs count as 12-foot, 18-foot logs, 19-foot logs would still only count as 16 feet as far as the lumber that exists within them. Why that is there's also a thing called broomage. And what broomage is when trees are felled in the bush, they're going to be slashed or bucked into logs. So one tree is going to turn into, let's say, 4 logs. Those 4 logs need to exist in my area at even lengths with a little bit left on the end of the log. And that little bit left, I believe, is going to be about 3 to 6 inches. So a 16-foot log can't be 16 feet. It has to be 16 foot 3 inches to 16 foot 6 inches. And that extra little bit on the end is called broomage, which allows us, once the log comes to the mill and we're processing that log into lumber, there's enough material basically for us to square the ends of the boards. So we're going to take those raw boards at, let's say, 16 foot 6. We're going to trim them or cut them in half. Maybe we make 2 boards out of a long board. But we're going to take that 16 foot 6 board, trim both ends, make them nice and square, send it off to the customer at, let's say, 16 foot 2 inches. And then that customer is going to do whatever they need to do with it from there. So that broomage is important in that. And again, you're gonna have to talk to people and figure out what your broomage is, because if you're buying logs, let's say people are selling you logs at 16 foot 1 inch, that doesn't give you as a Sawyer or as a mill enough material to work with to get the customer a 16-foot board, because you're not going to be able to tidy up the ends and square up your ends because you don't have enough of that broomage. So technically, and it's kind of might be a point of contention, but if you're buying logs at 16 foot 1 inch or 16 foot 2 inch, technically speaking, I don't believe you could scale them at a 16-foot log. It would technically downgrade to a 14-foot log because there's no 15, right? And there's not enough broomage on that log to count as a 16-foot. So how do we scale logs? How do we physically scale logs? All logs are going to have a small end and a large end. A butt log is going to be called the butt or the top. Generally speaking, it's going to be a small end diameter and a large end diameter. Certain species, like white pine, is going to be very noticeable. It's very easy to tell which is the top and which is the bottom, small end, large end. Species like red pine are very uniform in length over the whole course of the tree generally. The butt log might be flared a little bit and the top's going to be fairly small. So species to species, it might be difficult to figure out which is the small and which is the large end, but scaling always happens at the small end diameter. So when we go to scale our log, what we need to do first is we're going to use our tape measure. We're going to hook one end and we're going to measure the length of the log. And in this case, we're going to call this 16 foot 4 inches. So this is a 16-foot log. Now we need to figure out which is our small end. Well, we can visually see that this one's smaller than that. So this is where our scaling is going to take place. So now we know which end is our small diameter. How we're going to scale the log is we're going to take 2 measurements inside the bark of the log, so the bark doesn't count towards the measurement. We're going to take 2 measurements at 90 degrees from each other. As well, we're going to try to take the widest and the narrowest point of the log while still taking 2 measurements at 90 degrees. So this log in this example is kind of ovular. So we're going to take a measurement in this axis and then another one perpendicular to that across the short side of the log. So we're going to take a long side measurement and a short side measurement that are perpendicular to each other. And in this case, this is going to be 14 inches inside the bark, and this way across the log is going to be 10 inches across. And then with that, we can find the average diameter by adding them together and divided by 2, which is going to give us 12 inches. So now we've done the 2 measurements we need to do on this log. We've gotten the length and we've gotten the average diameter of the small end inside the bark. Now what we can do with this is take these 2 numbers, we'll bring back that table we looked at earlier. We're going to cross-reference 16-foot logs, so we're going to be using the nominal measurement. As well, we're going to find on that table the 12-inch column or row. And from that, we're going to get our volume of this log, which in this case is going to be 86 board feet from this 12-inch 16-foot log. Now one last thing on finding the average diameter. If the average diameter lands on 0.5 or a ½ inch, you're going to round down. And if it lands at higher than 0.5 inches, you're going to round up. So what I mean by that is if I have a log that's going to be, let's say, 11.5 inches across, and it's going to be 12 inches high, the average of that is going to be equal to 11.75 inches. So we're going to round that up to 12 inches. But if I have an 11-inch log and a 12-inch log, the average of 11 and 12 is going to be 11.5 inches. That's going to get rounded down to 11 inches to use in that table. So that's just an important thing to note, is that at 0.5, where normally outside of log scaling, you're going to round up at 0.5. Log scaling, you're going to round down at 0.5. Anything above 0.5, then you'll round up. That's all I have for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.